Thank you.
All right. Is this on? Yep. Okay, great. So today we're going to be talking about a project that Pam and I have been working on for a little while now. Oh, maybe.
That's my computer.
Okay, just bear with us for a moment. All right, so today, Pam and I are going to be talking about a project that we've been working on for a little while now, and that project is called Breach Analytica. So what is Breach Analytica, you might be wondering? Well, it's a project that we've been working on for a little while now, and it's a hack data search engine, and eventually we would like it to be a hack data search service on the web. But that's not the focus of this talk today. We're actually going to be talking about the historical timeline of hack data search services, and we're also going to be talking about, well, Pam's going to be talking about the design of a hack data search engine itself. So before we get into that, let's do a quick little who am I? So my name's Trevor Giffen. My colleagues call me Trev. I am currently a third-year undergraduate student at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and I'm also a junior security consultant for a cybersecurity firm called Agid, which was recently acquired by KPMG. So besides that, I've been interested in security communities such as this one for a number of years now, before I even knew what InfoSec was. That goes back as early as 2013, to be honest with you. The specific niche area that I've always been interested in has been intelligence. So that includes investigative OSINT and intelligence collections. So that's a quick run over of who I am, and I'll pass it off to Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam Hammer. I also go to UIT, and I also work for Agid. My passions include InfoSec and development. Before we start, I want to give a quick shout out to the professors at UIT. Firstly, a year ago, we were 2 students selected to be sent here, and without that, we wouldn't be here today. And secondly, I want to give a shout out to Agid for all of their support. We actually met them at Hackfest last year, so it's pretty special. Take it away.
Okay, so we've kind of mentioned that we're going to be talking about the history of hack data search services and the design of a hack data search engine. So how that's going to go is I'm going to talk about the hack data search services, and Pam will talk about the search engine design. But before we get into that, I want to go over a little bit of a data breach 101. So explore the foundation of why all of this exists in the first place. So we're going to talk about the data breach issue. So let's start simple with the information that this all revolves around, with a simple question. What happens when we register an account on a website? Basic question, but it needs to be asked. So when we go to a website, we normally see a registration form like the one behind me, and it will ask you for various pieces of information: a username, email, password, the usual. So we all know about this, but when we submit that, the account is added to a database in a special table called a user table. And every account gets its own little special entry inside of this user table. But so using the information from submitted here, that'll create an account entry, and that'll be saved to the user table, where we have a number of account entries. So this could be 1 or 2, or a few dozen, a few hundred, a few thousand, a few million, billions. So databases are massive, and I just want to highlight the fact that these can store a lot of sensitive, personally identifiable information. And so it's a sensitive target, and an attractive target at that, for adversaries. So when your server is compromised, there's a good chance that this data will probably also be stored in the same server if you have a small web form or something like that. So there's a good chance that somebody is going to steal a copy of your user table. And that's been the case for a number of large organizations, including social media of various kinds, so MySpace, LinkedIn, VK, which is like a Russian Facebook, and so forth. We even talk about Neopets, which is a child's game that has account entries from many, many years ago. I'm even in that. I think I was 5 years old when I made an account on that. And that still exists today. So these 9 data breaches alone total to just shy of 1.3 billion account entries, which is pretty significant when you think about the fact that there's only like 7 point something billion people in the world. So that's pretty significant. So we actually got this data from a website called vigilante.pw. And this website currently sports about just shy of 4.5 billion account entries derived from about just shy of 4,600 data breach leaks. And so when I say 4,600, I mean a ton just like this, but there's a lot of small ones in there too. But we specifically chose to use Vigilante for our statistics for a reason. And that's because it's an accurate representation of the data breach leaks that exist on the market today. So these aren't fake numbers. These numbers are actually from somebody who collects this data and actively tries to collect as much of it as possible and indexes it and keeps track of it on this website. There are some other websites that will say, oh, there's over 10 billion account entries floating around the web. That's kind of the case, but realistically, the people who you're worried about and the people who will have access to the information, like ourselves even, that's more realistic of a number that we're around. Now, there are some other services that have more than that, but this is a good baseline. So it's clear that we have a data problem on our hands. And that problem is that data breach leaks are everywhere, and servers are being compromised all the time, and there are people who actually have operations dedicated to stealing this data. And so what we've seen is that a data market has been made out of this because there's so much demand for this personally identifiable information and so much demand for newer data sets or anything like that, that there has to be a supply for it. And those suppliers are data brokers or hackers directly. And oftentimes they work together to make a lot of money off of this data, your data. So we have a data market. And the thing about this data market, though, is I'm sure the data market has been around for a number of years, but it's only really picked up pace in about the last 5. And going back to the number on Vigilante, 4.5 billion, years ago, it was considered a lot to have like 100 million account entries in like 2013 or 2014. That would be very significant at that time. So being at 4.5 billion now has shown an exponential increase. So with all of this data being in circulation in these data markets, this data is becoming heavily saturated as there's more brokers joining the data market. And so where a data set, let's say LinkedIn, was worth $1,000 last month, this isn't a true number, by the way, just a hypothetical. So if a data set was worth $1,000 last month, it could be worth $100 this month because so many data brokers have sold that data over the last month. And by next month, it could be $10. And when it's like $5 or $10, why even bother broking it anymore? So what a lot of people or brokers will do is try to make a name for themselves by sharing this information in designated communities or in their designated networks. So they actually leak this data publicly to make more of a name for themselves, or just due to the hacker nature, they just want to share the information, and they don't really have much regard for the ethical implications of that. So public data leaks everywhere. And because the data market has become so heavily saturated, there is the one-off person who just leaks the data every time. And this will be a continuous issue. So there's a number of people who would be interested in these data sets. One, security researchers like us, and you guys, and cyber criminals. Similar things, different goals. So what attackers will do is gather all of the data, put it into one massive archive with hundreds or thousands of data sets, and they'll use a command such as grep or sift to go through these data sets. It'll take a few minutes or an hour or 2 hours, depending on how much data you have and how bad your computer is. So the slang for that is a DB lookup. So you do a DB lookup, you find the credentials, great. And with this information we find from the DB lookup, you can do an account compromise or an account takeover attack or maybe you are on a red team or you're a penetration tester, and you don't want to bother even hacking the systems. Why even bother hacking the systems if all you have to do is go to a search engine or your own archive, pull the data, and just log into the accounts? Like, you don't even need to hack into anything. You just sign in. So there's a number of use cases in which an attacker could leverage these data leaks to break into an organization, or a security researcher could do it to raise security awareness and further secure their infrastructure. So there's a data market. There's supply, there's demand. And what do we do in the tech industry when we have a lot of demand for something? We make a service for it. So introducing hacked data as a service. Yeah, so great. But really, there are hacked data search services, and these have been only created in about the last 5 years or so. And they're pretty straightforward if you think about it. They collect data breach leaks. They take this information. They index it into a database, like what Pam's done. And they make searchable, or they make it queryable, if that's a word. So you can query for different pieces of information. So you could search for a username, or an email, a password, a hash, really anything that you could match with like regular expressions or something of the likes. So put even more simply than this, if you wanted a hacked data search service that just had an email search tool, all it would be is just like this. This is a sample from Have I Been Pwned. We'll talk more about that later. So you just put your email in here, it searches the database, and it tells you the results. So put simply, that's what a hacked data search service is. So you're probably wondering by now, we have this data problem, and because of this problem and the growing market behind it, there's hacked data search services. But where the hell do they get this data? Is probably what you're wondering. Well, as of recent, a lot of it comes from web forums, such as raid forums or hell forums, and different communities, black markets, and so forth. This is where all of the trades, sales, and leaks take place. And this is probably where you're going to find a lot of your harder to get data that isn't easily accessible on hosted database archives, which we'll talk about in another moment. Furthermore, sometimes security researchers see the benefit of hacked data search services and how they can be used to improve security awareness and properly and responsibly disclose data leaks to the public. So sometimes security researchers just give people like us access to this data, just for the greater good. So looking at this point, hosted database archives, what is that? Well, it's something like what we see down here, but a lot bigger. So these are archives of data that store a ton of hacked data breaches, or data breach leaks, I should say. So how hard is it to find one of these things? It's really not. You just Google, download hacked databases. So, oh, wow, what is this? Public database directory, public DB host. Wonder what that could be. The biggest free-to-download collection of publicly available website databases? For security researchers and journalists, of course. Of course. So we have a search bar. We can look up gaming, and that does a pattern match for every file with the word gaming in it. So I guess here we have network gaming, a bunch of random gaming forums with like 50,000 lines, gaming radio, shard gaming, whatever darkstargaming.com is, so forth. And it's really easy to download. You just click the download button. It's not that hard. Or more interestingly, if you just want all of them, you could just go to the archive in which they're stored and use the wget command to download all of them. So it's clear that there's a lot of data breach information on the web. But how do we know it's true? Well, a lot of the time, these data breach leaks are, in fact, legitimate, but sometimes they're not. That's because it's an attractive opportunity to do scamming or possibly do a misinformation campaign against a company, perhaps a competitor. And it really shouldn't come with much surprise that data breaches are fabricated for these reasons, especially for scams when stealing databases to sell is a really lucrative opportunity. So one data set could be sold for hundreds or thousands of dollars. Attractive scamming opportunity, if you ask me, and many people on hack forums would agree. So how do we prove that these data breach leaks are in fact real or fake? Well, there's a number of things we could do. We could go through the account information, check the usernames and emails. Are these in here? Are there matches? How many account records are in this data breach leak? If there's 100,000 records for this data breach leak and there's only 20,000 people on the website, it's probably fake. But more interesting, let's talk about a process made by another security researcher and a friend of mine, Allison Nixon. When she worked at Deloitte, she did a white paper on vetting leaks. So there's a few key points that she brought it down to for vetting if a leak is fake. So first, check if the leak is recycled. So if you have an archive of all of these data sets, and you can take one piece of information from the data breach leak in question and search through all of the archives and see if there's any matches. If there's a match, and it's the same information in two sets, well, your data breach leak at hand or in question is probably fake. So that's the first indicator I would look for, and many others would. Next, you could grab a subset of emails or usernames and check for uniqueness and existence in it. There's a number of ways you could do that, but that's not the point of this, so yeah. You could also check the password policy adherence and look at the passwords, but honestly, who wants to do that? So yeah. So that pretty much concludes our Data Breach 101 to understand the foundational issue at hand that's caused there to be hacked data search services created and hacked data search engines. And it's important that we understand that a data problem exists and that it's an exponentially growing issue at hand, whether we realize it or not. And it will continue to be a growing issue. And that's why hacked data search services started being a thing about 5 years ago, when this issue really started to pick up pace, and even today. So we're just going to go over a timeline of search services that have been created over the last 5 years, starting from the beginning to now, and we'll also talk about the ethical implications of each one of these services. Well, not each one. We're just going to focus on 3 of these. So a number of years ago, I'm sure that somebody else had this idea before anybody on here, and they probably had their own local search services for this data. But the first website to really come forward and make a big thing out of it and really brand themselves on it and coin all of this was Have I Been Poned, and they were founded in December 2013. Since then, there's been a number of new services, and these are just the ones that I consider to be noteworthy or talk-worthy for that matter. And yeah, all of these leading up to Breach Analytica soon to come. But we don't have time to talk about all of these, so we're just going to put an emphasis on 3 of these. Have I Been Poned, Leaked Source, and Notspace. So just out of curiosity, how many people in this room know what these are? Can you just raise your hand? Okay, so all of you. But there's still a few people who didn't put their hands up, so we're going to take a introductory approach with this. So I chose these 3 services because they're the closest representations I could get to the hacker hat system. So how many of you know what black hats, white hats, and gray hats are? So all of you, but we're still going to talk about the terminology real quick. So black hat is a hacker or malicious actor, for that matter, who engages in nefarious activities. So oftentimes it's illegal and there's little to no regard for ethics at all, so they're unethical. A white hat, on the other hand, is the exact opposite of this. They try their best to follow laws, and they try their best to be ethical. And gray hats are somewhere in between this area. It's a gray area per name, and where they might not have as much regard for laws, they might do what they consider to be ethical according to their virtue ethics. So Have I Been Poned is our example of a white hat search service. Leaked Source will be our example of a black hat search service. You'll see why. And Notspace is our example of a gray hat search service. So Have I Been Poned was originally founded in 2013, in December, by Troy Hunt. Troy Hunt is a well-vetted security researcher within our industry. He's a Microsoft MVP, et cetera, credentials, et cetera. So Have I Been Poned it can be thought of as the original hack data search service. And what's great about them is that they're white hat. They're ethical and responsible, and they've done a lot to really push forward security awareness around this topic. And that's why many of you have heard of this because of Have I Been Pwned, probably. So Have I Been Pwned offers a free search service, and that's what they're most known for. They're a free email search service, which anybody can go to this website and which looks like this, by the way, and just search for an email, and it'll tell you the results. They also have a number of other things, like a verified domain search. So if any of you want to check if you have employee credentials for your companies, you can verify that you are who you say you are, you work with this company, and they'll help you identify your employees' credentials. They also have a password search service and a number of other things, breach notification subscription list, and so forth. But what's great about Have I Been Pwned is that they've been privacy respecting through all of this. They act with integrity and transparency. So for those of you who may have maybe not seen this before, this is their website, haveibeenpwned.com, where they currently have approximately 5.5 billion account credentials indexed, derived from about 317 data breach leaks. So trying this service, we just searched for test@test.com, which shows up on 187 breaches and a number of pastes. Scrolling down on the same page a little, you'll see descriptors of these data breaches. So this would include the data breach leak date, a description of what happened, and the compromised data contents. So we talked about how this is a new thing. Have I Been Pwned was originally founded in 2013. They started off with like 30 million records or something like that. By October of 2014, they had just shy of 200 million account credentials derived from about 34 data breach leaks. And by the time it was 2016, it was just shy of 2 billion with 168 breaches. And by 2018, this number is nearly doubled, or actually more than doubled, with 5.5 billion account credentials derived from 317 breaches. And by 2020, I don't know, it'll probably be more like 10 billion or something like that. Apparently it's mandatory that you add memes to these things. So we've talked about how Have I Been Pwned is an ethical search service. But what about the unethical search service? Leaked source. How many in here have used leaked source for their own security research purposes? Only one? Okay. So I assume some of you just don't want to admit to this. All right, so probably like a quarter of this room. And in recent years, they were a notoriously known hack data search service. They were just like Have I Been Pwned in many ways. They look a little bit more elite, though, and in addition to their free search service, which offers limited data results, as you can see here, you could also pay for this information. So the results aren't limited. They aren't censored at all. So if you want to look up my information in this database, you can for $2. And you can also get access to my old passwords. You know how I mentioned that I was in Neopets when I was 5? Well, that data, that from me when I was 5 years old, or something like that, you could buy. But there's some problems with that, and this is what makes this an unethical and illegal search service. And apparently this has something to do with trafficking identity information. Apparently the RCMP agrees with me. So leaksource.com. By the way, I want to mention that the founder, Jordan Bloom, is based out of the Toronto area, I think Richmond Hill, but that's irrelevant now, wherever he is now. And he made about $250,000 off of selling this data breach leak information over a couple of years. RCMP didn't like that, so I think we can agree that it's probably a black hat service. And kind of going back to this, a point to take away is that you probably shouldn't sell people's personal information, especially when it has passwords. So this brings me to my next point. It's Notspace, our gray hat service. I don't really know where on the spectrum of the hat system they actually sit, but I'm going to go with gray for now. What makes them interesting is that they don't provide any free search service at all. It's very clean. They have a dashboard for businesses, and they put an emphasis on business-to-business sales. So even though they're still like least source and they do sell access to any of you, they do try to put an emphasis on selling to businesses, which I think has some ethical features to it, because you can use this to improve security awareness within your organization. You could use this service to find maybe what credentials have been leaked from your employees, and you can actually act on that. Then you could go and give them a practical, real security awareness training session without spooking them too much. They also operate that website, Databases Today. So you know that that data archive that we looked at earlier? Yeah, they run that. So that might be more on the black hat side, but they disagree. So this is Notspace. A bit more clean looking than the other features, something that you'd maybe want to buy for your business. That's why they took a startup-like approach to offering this. So they sell to businesses, also to people. And they put a special emphasis on account takeover prevention. So they want you to use their services to help prevent account takeover attacks within your organization. They also, and that's useful to many companies. That could also be useful to law enforcement agencies or private investigators, anybody doing things like fraud investigation, investigation into cybercrime. Maybe you want to help verify, or you want to use some information from this in a court case to prove that somebody had a certain account somewhere, and so forth. So there's a number of ways that this could be used practically within our society without abusing it. So by now you're wondering, probably, is this legal? It's a gray area, and that's why we've been talking about ethics so much. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you the exact distinctions and where the legality lies in all this, and the legality of these different services. But there's been a lot of support for Have I Been Pwned by governments, organizations, and law enforcement alike. The opposite was the case for leaked source, and those were our two major case studies. So Notspace claims that when a hacked data breach or a data breach leak circulates in the public market for long enough and it gets exposed to the internet surface, it becomes a part of the public domain. Some people would disagree because you probably don't think that your password is a part of the public domain, even if it is available. They also claim that you're allowed to distribute this information as researchers, in their case, including passwords. Well, you've got to draw some ethical lines there. And they also claim that selling this type of data is legal in most Western countries, including the United States, but that's kind of contradictory when we look at this. So, okay. So that brings us to our next point. Legality aside, it's important that if we're creating a hacked data search service, we draw some ethical boundaries and determine where those are. So by looking at Have I Been Pwned, leaked source, and Notspace, we can learn from their rights and wrongs and pull away a few points. So if you want to make a hacked data search service, first things first, you as the operator need to be responsible because you have a lot of power in your hands. You have a lot of data. So it's really important that you handle that data well, you protect it well, and you respect people's privacy. And that's probably the most important point here. Because when you are handling 4 or 5 billion account credentials, like we are, you have to respect that. Each one of those entries, even though a lot of them are probably bots, are also people. And you need to respect their right to privacy. So with that said, don't be the cause of account takeover attacks. Don't be like leaked source and offer a service for people to use and abuse. And abide privacy laws, because you're not exempt. So if somebody wants to, somebody wants to remove their account from these data breach leaks, let them. And this kind of brings me down to a few key points from the CIA triad. And I actually learned about the CIA triad from my computer security professor right here, Garrett Hayes. Hi, Garrett. So let's talk about confidentiality. Well, it's important that if we're handling this data, we do so with security. So we want to make sure that we protect this data and we handle it well, and everything's confidential and safe and sound and private. Also, verified integrity. So we've talked about how the great part about Have I Been Pwned is the transparency and integrity behind the operator running it, Troy Hunt. Friendly face to this community. So Act with integrity when you're being an operator of one of these services. And lastly, limited availability. So if you're offering one of these search services, limit the information based on the client. Some organizations might need raw access to this information, and that's just the case because criminals have access to it too. But you don't just sell this data to anybody with $1 and claiming that they will be your next customer. You need to actually vet your customers and select which crowds you want to make this an attractive service to. So with all these ethical boundaries taken into consideration, we thought, how can we use this to better what we're creating, our project, Breach Analytica? And I'm going to pass this off to Pam now, and she's going to talk a little bit more about what we've done with our Breach Analytica project and the design of hack data search engines. So off to you, Pam.
Thank you, Trev. So I'm sure it has been made clear that we, in fact, have created our own breach database. And now is the part where I'm supposed to tell you how we did it. But I'm not going to make it that easy. What I'm going to do instead is show you our journey, or otherwise known as the process. And a key point I would like to make is that I revisited my notebook to show you our actual process. Some of these thoughts, questions, and notes are referenced from this book. And I do this because I want to show you that in times it was painful, but we did it. And what makes it beautiful is that there are no tutorials or guides for this. We couldn't just watch a YouTube video or read a Medium article. We had to carve our own way. Every problem we faced had no necessarily right or wrong solution. It was just a problem that we had to solve. And when we solved it, it usually contained 3 or 4 more problems. So without further ado, let's go to problem 1. Actually, taking this back, this is what we thought this project would look like. And this is what it actually looked like. So without further ado, let's go to problem 1. What in the hell is a hack data search engine? I had this question. When Trev came to me with all of this data and said, I think we should build this, I thought, what in the hell is a hack data search engine? But as silly as this question is, it had to be asked. Because before you begin the process, you have to understand what the process is. I mean, what really are we building here? What we think we want is a search engine. So we thought, how does Google work? And from what we could find, Google sort of works like this, roughly. You have web crawlers that crawl the web and pull raw data. Then you have an indexer, which takes that raw data and builds an index stored inside of a database. Then you have a search engine, which determines what it is you're searching for, and then takes that data from the database. And then lastly, you have your user interface. And when we looked at this, we saw, okay, we have the raw data. We need to build an indexer, which is going to take that raw data and build our index stored inside of our database. And then lastly, we just need a user interface because we know what people are searching for. And now you can see a clear process. And on to problem 2. How do we want our index to be formatted? Or in other words, what is the design of our database going to look like? We first had to decide what data we wanted to put in our database. We know that breach data can contain a multitude of things, but we decided to keep it simple for stage 1. We ended up choosing just emails and file names. And when we looked at this data, we noticed it formed a sort of hierarchy-like structure. You can see that each domain name may have multiple emails associated with that domain, and that each file may contain multiple emails. And after some research, we saw that this could translate to a SQL relational database. And I redrew this for better quality. So here we have a domain table, a master email table, and a file table. And from our master table, we can link the associated domains and files with foreign keys. And then we can sort of build on top of this, say if we wanted to add content table or content data to the file table, we would only need to edit that table. And now that we know the structure of our database, the next question or problem comes down to, how do we pull this data from those data breaches and essentially add it to our database following this design? And we sort of broke this down into 2 parts, The first, data selection, pulling those emails and file names from those data breaches. And what we did here was we created a small program that walked all of these files and found an instance of every email. And we did this using regular expressions. But this part wasn't necessarily easy. We went through multiple regular expressions before we found the one with the best outcome. And I'll show you an example. You can see here the first two are legitimate looking emails, but the last isn't legitimate. And depending on the regex, it may end up selecting all options as emails, which would be a false positive. Or it may not select the entire email, resulting in a false negative. Here's another example. But with some trial and error, we're eventually able to craft a regex with the most successful outcome, which is a small victory. So now that our script is done, our script was designed to create one massive file with an instance of every email found. And I'll show you an example of one line. But with the database design, we want it to look like this. So the next problem comes down to, how do we convert this to this? And so here's where more of our scripting knowledge came into play. We were able to create a second program to translate this master file into this relational structure. But before we could push this to the database, we had to ensure the success of this translation. We had to ensure that there was no duplicate data, that the foreign keys were mapped correctly, and that the data was clean and correct as to our knowledge. Now, once this can be properly ensured, the data can then be pushed to a database. And the final question comes down to, how can we make this database as fast as we know how to? With roughly 4 to 5 billion accounts, the question of speed comes down to database optimization. Now, this isn't a part I want to go too into depth, as my knowledge of databases is limited, but I did want to point out that we put a lot of stress on the essence of speed, and we were able to reach our performance goals by implementing in SQL what is known as an index. Now, I use the term index a little loosely, and I apologize for that, but what I'm referring to here is the data structure that SQL uses to retrieve data in a short amount of time. And with that said, I just wanted to point out that this statement was executed in the process. And what better way to end this portion of the talk than to show you a quick example of our database.
Yeah. So we actually prepared a prototype database just here in Python called Poned. And so this isn't actually the search service that we want to have publicly available with Breach Analytica in time. But here's a prototype for prototype purposes.
Yeah. So you can do an email search or a domain search. If you want to do an email search, feel free to find us later. But we figured we might as well do like Hackfest. So you can see that there were 3 instances found. And that's just our prototype. So now that we have this database, I'm sure you all are wondering, what do we plan to do with it? And the question isn't really set in stone per se, but we plan on following in similar footsteps as Have I Been Pwned, in an ethical and in a responsible manner.
So moving forward, while we do plan on being ethical and responsible, we also think that there's some responsibility on organizations everywhere to consider this exponentially growing problem when they're doing security awareness. So consider using Hack Data Search Services as a part of your process for improving your security, your organizational security awareness, and also to make sure that you don't have leaked credentials for your organization on the web. So there's lots of ways that you can use that, but that's what our goal will be to help you do with Breach Analytica. And
so we have a website at breachanalytica.com where we will eventually post updates, and we also have a Twitter account, so feel free to follow us on our journey. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. So
Are there any questions?
Yeah. No blockchain questions.
Yes?
Are you storing any passwords or sort of weak hashes for those passwords? Or are you doing that?
Yes, so on live servers, no. But to actually do all of this, it's mandatory that you do handle raw information, including password hashes and plain text passwords. So we do have offline secured, fully disk encrypted drives in which we store this data on, and we do offline tests to actually work with the data. But for anything that will be on live servers in the future with services, we will only have emails available online. So we're very careful about how we handle our information. So yeah.
How do you plan to differentiate based on other search engines?
Okay, so the question is how do we plan on differentiating ourselves from different search engines? Well, honestly, a lot of them are the same idea. We're not that different, but we saw an opportunity to do this ourselves. And honestly, this is just a fun research and development project for us. And yeah, so.
Did you say this will be open source?
So the question was, is this going to be open source?
No. I talked about the structure of the database, and that was kind of just like showing you kind of our thought process along the way. But the actual code itself, probably not. We don't want to just give that to anyone that has access to it. It's not particular like super complicated or anything, but it won't be open source.
And also, if we were to open source something like this, I actually had somebody bring the point up to me of open sourcing such project very recently, and they were talking about how they wanted to create something similar, but rather than offering the service, they just want to write the code that would create such service and open source it. It'll probably happen eventually. Somebody will do it, but personally, I want to advise against it, because by open sourcing a project like this, even though we've said it's not really that hard to make, by open sourcing it, you're providing the code for script kiddies and amateur hackers and people on websites like hackforums.net to go ahead and create their own hack data search services. And we don't need more paid hack data search services showing people's passwords, because not all people are responsible and ethical like ourselves.
How are you going to vet people using your service to ensure cyber criminals can't access your database?
So the question is how are we going to vet our clients or end users? So people will be able to search for their information like email addresses and usernames eventually. And the thing is, we won't actually show you any of the raw information. Like we said, we are only storing the data breach information and email addresses on the website as of right now. Well, actually, we don't even have the website up yet, but long story short, we won't show any private information beyond just an email to the person querying the database. And we aren't actually offering any business-to-business sales or anything like that, not at this point in time anyway. I don't know where that's going to go. Who knows? But if we were to ever get to that point, or if other service providers were to explore business-to-business sales, you definitely should come up with some type of process for vetting your clients, because you shouldn't just sell this data to anybody. But overall, I don't have a very straightforward answer to at the moment, because we aren't doing business-to-business sales. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Consider data that would be significantly impactful to a person, such as the Ashley Madison hack data, or any of the ones that are PHIs, or the things that are coming out of the Internet projects.
Okay, so I think the question is are we being considerate of more sensitive data breaches like Ashley Madison when we're providing people the searching opportunity? As of right now, we've chosen to not index Ashley Madison for similar reasons as why Troy Hunt hasn't with Have It Been Pwned. But that's something we'll consider in the future more. But right now, honestly, right now, I'm not too sure of what we'll do about that, because this is just the starting of this project. This is the first time we've even actually mentioned it publicly. So But moving forward, we will try to be considerate in making our decisions of the sensitivity of this data breach information,
That's a good question.
like Ashley Madison.
Sorry.
The main difference between your project and I have
Okay, so this is similar to the question previously asked. What is different about our hack data search service? And the answer is not much. We just wanted to do it ourselves, and we want to see if we can do it better. And honestly, I like the name Breach Analytica. And which name would you rather say in a boardroom? Have I been pwned or Breach Analytica? Just saying.